And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because I've got some phenomenal stories that you don't want to be missing out on. Tonight's story is absolutely brilliant. It's a camper van story from a woman called Cheryl, who took a year off to go exploring North America. And she had an encounter with the hairy man. So let's get started. Dear Sarah, my name is Cheryl, and my story starts in the fall of 2013, when my husband Dave and I were taking a year off work, just traveling around North America for a while. My husband was involved in the construction industry and was leaving his assistant manager in charge of the whole operation while we enjoyed a very extended, long-needed holiday. We decided to just spread our wings on this wonderful open road adventure with the whole world at our feet. My husband had recently had a heart bypass, and he said he was not getting any younger and that life was for living and not for always working. You see, he came so close to losing his life on 3 separate occasions with multiple heart attacks, so he just wanted to use the time he had left for living life to the fullest. So that is what we did, and that was when the camper idea was born. We had met wonderful people during our travels and seen some marvellous scenic views that took our breath away, from beautiful natural coastline, glorious white sandy beaches, to snow-capped volcanic mountain tips, lush green valleys, rounded hills, lily-covered ponds, gushing streams, silvery lakes, and alpine forests. We had also seen so much abundant wildlife, and even had an encounter with a mountain lion that crossed our path on one occasion while driving down a large dusty road. I remember it looked directly at us, rolled back its mouth to reveal very sharp teeth, and gave us a warning growl. But we were so tickled pink to have had such an awesome sighting of such a formidable creature. My story starts when we were driving our camper van down Highway 1 from Westport, California, and admiring the ravishing views of the Lost Coast with the beautiful shapely rock formations bulging through the water's edge like great works of modern sculpture. We were glad to be traveling down this road in the fall, because it can get very vicious during stormy days in this part of the world, and believe me, you want to avoid those conditions at all costs, as some people have been swept to their deaths by tunneling aggressive windstorms in the past. Also, I cannot help but think that fall is always the best time of the year, because the excessive heat of the summer has at long last retreated and been overtaken by the far kinder weather conditions, which for me is so much more preferable. Finally, we reached the last leg of Highway 1, which is where the redwood trees finally meet the coast, and then we travelled towards Leggett. Please don't quote me on my navigational skills, because they're dreadful, and my husband does the driving, but this is roughly the route I remember that we took. As we drove, we noticed that the glorious redwood trees became larger and even more imposing. Finally, we reached the town of Garberville, where we stocked up on all our essential supplies and proceeded on our journey towards our camping site. We travelled northwards towards the Avenue of the Giants and then past Humboldt Redwood State Park, which I've always wanted to visit given all the activities available to visitors in the area. We were not going to be camping there because we had heard of a remote camping ground further afield, off the beaten track, that was far more preferable because it was so close to nature and next to an idyllic lake where there were very few campers, and it was very, very beautiful there. Suddenly we found ourselves driving down this dusty red road, surrounded on either side by giant redwood trees that were so tall they towered above us with majestic trunks of brown bark covered with carpets of beautiful green moss. "It is so gorgeous here," I gasped, "and those trees are utterly extraordinary. They're so distinguished looking." Suddenly crossing the road, larger than life, was this hairy humanoid who was most definitely not a bear, although you could be forgiven for thinking so because it was covered in dark brown hair from head to toe, and it had the longest arms I have ever seen, with human-like hands. The creature turned its head and looked directly at us for a moment, and that was when we saw the bullet-shaped head and the long face, the protruding brow ridge, the flat black nose. We also noticed that the eyes were big and brown and deep set, and they stared at us only for a moment with an open curiosity. I also got the sense that it was upset that we had noticed it, and it had been discovered. It then scurried away very fast, because it really did seem to regret that it was seen by us. But this thing, the way it moved on those long agile legs, I would hazard a bet that this thing was faster than a cheetah and equally as graceful, if not more so. Soon it vanished from our sight, and you could have heard a pin drop in the car as both my husband and I assimilated what we had just seen in a long moment of deep contemplation. "What the heck was that?" asked my husband, looking horrified. "What in the world did we just see?" It almost looked like the pictures of early man, because it looked like an ape-man, I suppose. I never imagined that such a creature could exist in North America, but I saw it with my very eyes. The sighting disorientated us for a long time, because for a long time our encounter with the creature was all that we could talk about. We even pulled up on the edge of the road to compose ourselves for a long while, because we could not believe what we had just seen, and we were seriously rattled by the experience. I could see my husband was physically shaken, and I was worried about his heart condition getting worse. "Calm down," I said. My husband started to breathe into a brown paper bag, and he took long breaths. Such was his shocked reaction from seeing that creature. "I feel like I'm having a panic attack," he said. "No animal has made me feel this way before. I can't stop trembling." "The creature's gone," I assured him, "and he wasn't in pursuit of us anyway. I could tell he didn't want us to see him at all." "Maybe so," said my husband, "but what the heck was it?" Before we knew it, the day had retreated. The sun had set, covering the whole valley in glorious golden pink hues, and then suddenly the night set in, and it grew very dark. We tried to locate the campground we had been looking for, but it seemed to be so elusive, just like the Scarlet Pimpernel, because it was impossible to find. I now knew we were well and truly lost, and even our GPS sent us on a wild goose chase to what can only be described as the middle of nowhere. In the end, we just gave up and decided to find a small clearing where we could park our camper van overnight, even though it might not be a legal place to park. But it was a risk worth taking, and hopefully no one would notice us, since the area seemed relatively remote. We found what seemed to be the most perfect spot to park, surrounded by the largest redwood trees I've ever seen, and they circled our van in the most perfect half-moon shape. "It's so lovely out here," I said, setting up an outside table and chairs, while my husband prepared the fire pit. I hastily prepared some Greek salad, and my husband cooked honey and mustard-flavoured chicken kebabs over the grill. It was already getting late, and I became ravenously hungry because we had barely eaten all day. Suddenly we heard a car pulling up beside our camper van, and a friendly-looking young man got out of the car, slamming the door behind him. He was wearing jeans and a white T-shirt and a dark brown cowboy hat that did give him a very sort of, cowboy-y look. "You do realise you're parked on private land," I said. He said. I explained to him that we had lost our way to the camping ground and were just pulled over for the night, but we were willing to move away if it was an inconvenience. "Look," said the young man, rubbing his moustache in deep contemplation, "this is my father-in-law's land. One of his sons was killed in a deadly car accident 10 years ago when his car overturned during the night and crashed into that redwood tree over there," he said, pointing to the tree. "My father-in-law has turned this little clearing into a memorial for his son because it is where the accident actually happened." "What? Someone was killed right here?" I asked in horror. "It gets worse," he said. "Some people have seen Mark's ghost in this very spot you're camping, and even strange lights and orbs have been detected around here, so I thought I ought to warn you." "Oh, I do not believe in the supernatural," I said, smiling, "but we're willing to move away out of respect for the poor young man who lost his life here. What a terrible, tragic accident." "It was tragic," said the young man, looking at us with misty, clouded eyes, as if covering up some tears. "Mark was one of my best friends in the whole world. We grew up and hung out together all the time, which was where I got to meet his sister, who is now my wife." "Wow," I said, "that's some story." "I spoke to him seconds before his accident on his mobile phone, said the man with a sad expression on his face. "Oh, my word," I said, "you don't think that caused the accident? I mean, speaking on mobile phones has been known to be highly dangerous while you're driving." "No, it wasn't that. It was something else. When I spoke to him, I've never heard him sound so terrified in all his life. I could not get him to calm down. He kept saying that he was going to die. He reckoned he was being chased by a couple of bloodthirsty, black, hairy, ape-like monsters who he said looked distinctly humanoid. He said they were pelting his car with huge stones and roaring at him." "Wow," I said, thinking about the creature we'd seen earlier in the day. Could this thing have terrorized the poor man, I wondered? The description of the creature seemed uncannily similar to what we had just witnessed. "What did the autopsy say?" I asked curiously. I assumed there was one. That's where the story gets more and more bizarre. It seems like the accident did not kill him straight away, but I think he was knocked unconscious. But they did find drag marks on the body, and his skull had been completely crushed by something very heavy. Worse still, it was suggested that rocks on the road had indeed overturned his vehicle. "So you think these creatures killed him?" I asked. "I have no doubt," said the man, "but we will never know who or what they were. Mark was no liar, so I truly believe his account. I've lived around these redwoods for years, and you mark my words, there is something in those forests, and whatever it is, it's not good." "Was he drinking that night?" asked my husband suddenly, as if looking for another plausible explanation for this young man's sudden demise. "No," said the man. "Mark only ever drank on special occasions, so no, he wasn't drinking, nor was he taking drugs." "Look," I said, "I think we should get moving after everything you've told us. It doesn't feel right staying here overnight. I've got a bad feeling about this." "No, please stay here," Mark insisted. "It's very dark around here at night, and you'll be worse off navigating your way around those redwoods. Personally, I think you should stay here until morning. As long as you don't mind ghosts," he teased. "A lot of people say they've seen Mark's ghost, and that's why I was warning you in the first place." We watched the man climbing back into his car and slamming the door behind him. He drove away, waving his hand at us. "What a nice man, and what a terrible story," I said, looking at my husband with a pained expression on my face. "I can't believe what he just told us." "That monstrous thing," said my husband, looking at me with wide eyes. "The thing we saw today. Well, that's the creature that must have killed the young man." "I agree," I said. "The profile fits too perfectly, almost too much. It could not have been anything else. But maybe the one we saw was innocent. There could be others around. They might be the guilty party, rather than the one we saw today." "My guess, it would be two territorial males," I suggested. I was awoken during the night to a loud crashing, thudding sound, like something hitting hard against a heavy barrier, and I looked out of the window to see the bright headlights of an upside-down car flashing against the redwood tree. I suddenly heard a car door being opened with a huge thud, followed by this heavy dragging sound, like a body being pulled along the ground, and then I heard a mighty crushing sound, like you would get if you stood on a thick ostrich egg, and crush it with your feet. I was terrified and proceeded to shake my husband violently. "Get up!" I cried. "Something is going on outside our camper." My husband peered outside the camper window, and I heard him saying, "My God!" He looked at me in horror. "It's a reenactment of what happened to that young boy," he said, "the one that was killed at that tree." We watched the flashlights of the car just fade, and the upside-down car suddenly vanished from our sight, and we saw some bright yellow orbs dancing through the redwood trees. One of the orbs looked like it had the face of a young man in it, and he was looking directly at us and my husband, and I knew at once it was the young man that had died in the tragic scene. We almost got the impression that he was smiling at us, and so I waved at him, and surprisingly, in that orb, he waved back at us. Finally, all the activity stopped, almost as quickly as it had started, and the orbs just disappeared and faded into the night. It was hard to make sense of what we had seen, but it had been real, and my husband is able to validate my claims. The following morning, when I got up, I drank some coffee and wandered towards the redwood tree that was involved in the accident. And there I saw a memorial stone planted next to the tree, saying in loving memory of our beautiful son Mark, "Gone too soon, you will be sorely missed." I then went and placed some flowers that I found growing in the valley onto the stone, and I wiped away a sorrowful tear. What a waste of a beautiful young life, I thought sadly. When we drove away from the area, I reflected on everything I had witnessed over the last 24 hours, and after some research, I discovered that the creature that we had seen was indeed a Bigfoot, and I believe it was Bigfoot-like creatures that had something to do with Mark's untimely death. So for someone who never believed in cryptid creatures like Bigfoot, or who never believed in the supernatural, my camper van trip around North America opened my eyes to a whole new reality. And my husband and I are much more open to things today, as we both have witnessed the supernatural and seen Bigfoot with our very own eyes. Well, I just want to thank you for that wonderful story. Absolutely phenomenal. Until next time, goodbye and good night.